Imagine a world where giant, luxurious airships glided through the sky, crossing the Atlantic in a single day. This wasn't just a dream. It was the audacious vision of men like John A. Morel, a pioneer in the golden age of airships. In 1907, while the Wright brothers were still tinkering with their early planes, Morel was sketching out plans for a colossal 1,450-foot-long airship. He called it the Ariel. This magnificent vessel was designed to carry 500 passengers and 40 tons of mail, promising a lightning-fast, 24-hour journey from New York to London. It was an incredible ambition, a floating palace that would conquer the skies and revolutionize travel. But to build something so grand, you have to start somewhere. Morel's first attempt was an experimental airship, a still massive 630-foot-long behemoth assembled in San Francisco. The excitement was palpable. This could be the machine that changed everything. However, in a dramatic and frankly embarrassing turn of events, the unmanned airship broke free from its moorings before it could even be properly tested. It drifted helplessly into the sky, a giant silver ghost floating over the city. Its impromptu flight came to a sudden end when it snagged on a massive oak tree, which ripped the delicate fabric to shreds. A spectacular failure, but Morel was far from finished. Undeterred by the San Francisco fiasco, Morel moved his operations to Berkeley, California, and immediately began work on his next project in 1908. This time, he opted for a slightly smaller, semi-rigid design. At 450 feet long, it was still a monster of the skies, powered by 5 roaring 60-horsepower automobile engines. He poured all his resources and reputation into this second chance. This airship had to work. It was his shot at redemption and a step toward his transatlantic dream. The stage was set for a public demonstration that would either cement his legacy as a visionary or brand him as a failure. The day of the test flight was May 23, 1908. Thousands of spectators gathered in Berkeley, their eyes turned to the sky, eager to witness history. As the massive airship ascended, a wave of applause and cheers erupted from the crowd. It climbed to about 300 feet, a majestic sight against the California sky. But then, disaster struck. A sickening crack echoed through the air as the airship's long frame suddenly buckled in the middle, folding in on itself like a broken toy. It collapsed, plummeting back to Earth in a tangled mess of fabric, cables, and machinery. All 16 men aboard were injured in the crash, but in what can only be described as a miracle, every single one of them survived. In the aftermath of the Berkeley crash, the dream of the Ariel was in tatters. Aviation experts of the era swarmed in to analyze the wreckage and the design. Their verdict was brutal. They declared that Morel's airship had violated nearly every known principle of airship construction. It was too long, too flimsy, and structurally unsound. His ambition had tragically outpaced the engineering of the time. While men like Count von Zeppelin in Germany were finding success with their rigid designs, Morel's failures served as a stark and expensive lesson. His story is a powerful reminder that in the race for the skies, the line between visionary and fool is often drawn by the unforgiving heart-stopping disaster and a fierce battle for aerial supremacy. It was an era that would define the future of aviation. Let's break down the two main players in this story. First, you have the aerostats. Think of these as lighter-than-air giants, like hot air balloons and airships, which get their lift from buoyancy, floating in the air much like a ship floats on water. The very first time humans took to the skies in a sustained flight was in one of these, way back in 1783. On the other side, you have the aerodynes. These are heavier-than-air machines, like the airplanes we know today. They need forward motion to generate lift over their wings. Their story began much later, with the first successful powered flight happening in 1904. For decades, these two technologies battled for the top spot in the sky. Nowhere was this rivalry more intense than in the race to conquer the final frontiers of our planet. The early 20th century saw the end of the heroic age of polar exploration, where adventurers relied on sleds and sheer endurance. A new mechanical age was dawning, and the airplane and the airship were the revolutionary tools that would unlock the secrets of the Arctic. The ultimate prize: to be the first to fly over the North Pole. This set the stage for an epic showdown between two legendary figures. In one corner was the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen, a veteran of polar expeditions, who put his faith in the power of the airship. In the other was Richard E. Byrd, a determined U.S. Navy pilot who championed the speed and agility of the airplane. Each technology had its distinct advantages. Amundsen's airship, an aerostat, was slower, but it was a beast. It could carry a massive payload, and crucially, its engines could be repaired mid-flight, a huge plus when flying over a frozen wasteland. Byrd's airplane, an Aerodyne, was much faster, but it had a critical weakness. If an engine failed, it had to land immediately, which over the Arctic ice was a near-certain death sentence. The race was on. On May 9, 1926, the world held its breath. Richard E. Byrd and his co-pilot Floyd Bennett took off in their Fokker tri-motor airplane. They returned hours later, claiming they had successfully flown over the North Pole. It seemed Byrd had won the race, securing his place in history. Just 2 days later, on May 12th, Roald Amundsen and his partner, the Italian airship designer Umberto Nobile, began their journey in the massive airship, the Norge. They not only flew over the pole, but continued on, achieving something even more remarkable: the first undisputed crossing of the entire Arctic ice cap, flying from Europe to North America. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. From the very beginning, doubts were cast on Byrd's claim. Experts scrutinized his flight logs and navigational calculations. Many believed that, given his plane's speed and the time he was in the air, it was mathematically impossible for him to have reached the pole and returned. His own diary, discovered decades later, contained erased but still legible calculations that suggested he turned back early. So, who was truly first? While Byrd was celebrated as a hero at the time, history now largely favors Amundsen. The flight of the Norge is the first verified and undisputed journey over the North Pole. This controversy highlights the incredible rivalry between these two pioneering technologies and the brave explorers who bet their lives on them. It's a powerful reminder that in the quest for greatness, the story isn't always as simple as who crosses the finish line first. The golden age of airships would eventually come to a tragic end, but its legacy and the epic race to the top of the world remains one of aviation's most compelling chapters. What do you think? Who deserves the title of being first over the pole? The race for aerial supremacy was far from over. In 1917, a twist of fate handed the Allies a game-changing advantage. A German Zeppelin, the L-49, was forced to land intact in France. Suddenly, the secrets of Germany's aerial giants were laid bare, providing a perfect blueprint for reverse engineering. This captured prize directly influenced the design of Britain's next great airship, the R-38. Intended for the U.S. Navy, the R-38 was a marvel of engineering, a direct descendant of the fearsome Zeppelin. But ambition outpaced understanding. In August 1921, during a final test flight over the city of Hull, disaster struck. The airship's massive frame, pushed to its limits during a sharp turn, buckled and snapped in two. The highly flammable hydrogen gas ignited, causing a catastrophic explosion that rained fire and debris from the sky. 44 men, both British and American, perished in the inferno. It was a brutal lesson in the unforgiving physics of lighter-than-air flight. America, reeling from the R-38 tragedy, faced another devastating blow just a few months later. In February 1922, the U.S. Army's Italian-built airship, the Roma, was undergoing a test flight over Virginia. A failure in its steering system sent the colossal vessel into an uncontrollable dive. It plunged directly into high-voltage power lines, and in an instant, the hydrogen-filled envelope erupted into a ball of fire. 34 crew members were killed, marking another dark day for airship aviation. The public was horrified, and the dream of aerial fleet seemed to be turning into a recurring nightmare. But the United States wasn't ready to give up. The lessons learned from the captured L-49 and the hard-won tragic knowledge from the R-38 and Roma disasters all converged on a single, ambitious project. In June 1922, construction began on the ZR-1, later christened the USS Shenandoah. This would be America's first-ever home-built rigid airship, and it would be different. Determined to avoid another hydrogen-fueled catastrophe, the Navy made a crucial decision. The Shenandoah would be filled with non-flammable helium. It was a costly and difficult choice, as helium was incredibly rare, but it was a vital step towards making airships safer. While America was building its future, the heroes of the past were facing their own final chapters. Umberto Nobile, the brilliant designer of the airship Norge, which had conquered the North Pole, set out on a new Arctic expedition in 1928 with his airship, the Italia. But the unforgiving Arctic weather proved too much. Caught in a violent gale, the Italia crashed onto the ice, scattering its crew. Nobile and several others were stranded, while half the crew was lost with the drifting remains of the airship. A massive international rescue effort was launched, and among the rescuers was one of the greatest polar explorers of all time, Roald Amundsen. The man who had beaten Scott to the South Pole and had flown over the North Pole with Nobile himself now took to the skies in a flying boat to search for his former colleague. Tragically, Amundsen's plane vanished without a trace on June 18, 1928. The great explorer was never seen again, a hero lost while trying to save others. The Italia incident was another stark reminder of the immense dangers that came with pushing the boundaries of exploration. By the mid-1930s, airships had become symbols of luxury and technological prowess. The German Zeppelin Company, masters of the craft, launched their grandest creation, the Hindenburg. It was the largest flying machine ever built, a floating palace that ferried passengers across the Atlantic in unparalleled comfort. For a brief time, it seemed the golden age of the airship had truly arrived. But on May 6, 1937, as the Hindenburg approached its landing in Lakehurst, New Jersey, after a smooth transatlantic journey, the dream ended in a spectacle of horror. In a matter of seconds, the hydrogen-filled behemoth burst into flames, and the entire world watched, through newsreels and radio broadcasts, as the magnificent airship was consumed by fire and crashed to the ground. The Hindenburg disaster was the final devastating blow. The dramatic and public nature of the tragedy shattered public confidence in airships forever. The era of the great aerial leviathans was over. The future of aviation, now undisputed, belonged to the airplane, which had been steadily growing faster, safer, and more reliable. The magnificent airships, once the titans of the sky, became relics of a bygone era of ambition, innovation, and ultimately, heartbreaking tragedy. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey through aviation history, be sure to subscribe for more.